For 2,000 years, astronomers have tried to identify one single point of light. A light that, according to an ancient text, moved across the sky, guided travelers across a desert, and stopped, precisely, over one house. They still cannot agree on what it was. Not a folk tale, not a metaphor invented later, but a specific claim that has resisted 2,000 years of scientific scrutiny. The account comes from the Gospel of Matthew. Wise men from the east arrive in Jerusalem, asking for a newborn king, one they say they have tracked by a star. These were not simply wandering stargazers. In the language of the Gospel they are called magi, a word that in the ancient world meant something very specific. Priest scholars of Persia and Babylon, trained for generations in reading the heavens, men whose entire profession was watching the sky for signs that kings and empires took seriously. Later Christian tradition would give them crowns, names, Melchior, Caspar, Balthasar, and a fixed number, 3. None of that comes from Matthew. The Gospel never counts the magi, never calls them kings, and never gives a single name where it simply says magi arrived, plural, a delegation credible enough that a king took the threat seriously. Everything past that is centuries of legend filling a silence the text itself leaves open. For centuries before Bethlehem, Babylonian priests had kept nightly written records of the sky, tracking every planet's rise and fall with obsessive, mathematical precision. So when men from that same tradition arrive in Jerusalem insisting a star has announced a king, it was not superstition talking. It was the most rigorous science of their age. And that single fact turns this from a pious legend into a genuine historical puzzle, one modern astronomers still argue about today. Not folklore repeating itself, but a genuine puzzle sitting at the intersection of scripture and hard astronomical record. According to Matthew, the star first appears, then leads the magi toward Jerusalem, then, after a detour to see a troubled king named Herod, does something stranger still. It goes ahead of them, and it stops, the text says, directly over the place where the child was. Two very different kinds of behavior, guiding and stopping, packed into a single ancient sentence. A star that moves ahead of travelers on the ground, and then stops over one specific building. No ordinary star, planet, or comet does that. And that detail alone is why this mystery has never fully closed. Herod himself is part of the account. Frightened by talk of a rival king, he questions the magi privately about the star's timing, then orders something horrifying once they slip away. The magi never return to Jerusalem, warned in a dream to avoid Herod. What the king did next is the darkest part of the account. He ordered every boy under 2 in the region killed, trying to erase a rival he could not identify by name. It is a horrifying detail, and also, strangely, a useful one. It tells us Herod believed the star had been visible for up to 2 years before the magi arrived, a real clue historians still use to narrow the search. That timing question matters more than it first appears. It is one of the few clues we have for pinning an actual year onto the sky. So astronomers went looking. If a real king really asked real magi about a real star's timing, then somewhere in the sky of that decade, something must have actually happened. The oldest and strongest theory points not to one bright star at all, but to 2 planets, moving so close together they appeared, to the naked eye, almost as one. Jupiter, the ancient symbol of kingship, and Saturn, long associated with Judea in Babylonian star lore, met in the sky not once but 3 times across the year we now call 7 BC. A triple conjunction like that is rare enough that Babylonian priests certainly recorded it, and its meaning, King Planet meeting Judea Planet, would have been unmistakable to men trained exactly as the Magi were. For centuries, this has been the leading scientific candidate. The astronomer Johannes Kepler himself calculated the 7 BC conjunction 16 centuries later, and proposed it as the explanation. It is elegant, it is precisely dated, and it fits almost everything the Magi themselves would have understood as a royal sign in the sky. Almost everything, because a conjunction, however striking, does not move ahead of travelers on a road. It does not hang low and stop directly over a single house. So other astronomers looked elsewhere, not at planets meeting slowly in the sky, but at something that streaks across it and vanishes. A single administrative decision made in fear that inadvertently left historians a real timestamp to work from. A comet. And remarkably, ancient sky watchers on the far side of the world may have recorded exactly one, at almost exactly the right time. A small footnote in a much larger, much darker story about a frightened king and the lengths he was willing to go to. Chinese court astronomers, whose meticulous sky logs stretch back centuries, recorded a bright guest star with a visible tail around 5 BC, seen for over 70 days. A comet does move. Ancient sky watchers described comets as pointing, like a finger, in the direction they traveled. To magi already journeying west, that alone could read as guidance. But comets were rarely read as good news in the ancient world. Across nearly every culture that recorded them, a comet meant disaster, plague, or the death of a king, not the joyful birth of one. That contradiction has never fully been resolved, which means the comet theory, however tempting the timing, still leaves the Magi's joy at seeing it unexplained. There is a third candidate, rarer, stranger, and briefly far brighter than anything else in this list. A tired traveler, watching night after night, would have no reason to doubt what their own eyes plainly showed them. A nova, or even a supernova. A star that, without warning, brightens for weeks into one of the most luminous objects in the entire sky, then slowly fades back into darkness. Korean and Chinese astronomers again kept the kind of records that might hold the proof, logs of guest stars appearing suddenly where no star had shone before. A nova genuinely could look motionless and dazzling for weeks, exactly the kind of light a tired traveler might describe as standing still over a distant town. The trouble is dating. No confirmed Korean or Chinese nova record lines up cleanly with the years scholars place Heard's death and the census both near. So the nova theory explains the brightness and the stillness beautifully, and struggles, so far, to nail down the year. A possibility that would not make the star any less real, only differently real than most readers assume. Which brings us to the detail that has broken every purely natural theory so far. Matthew says the star did not simply shine. It moved ahead of the Magi, then stopped. No planet does that. No comet does that. No exploding star does that. Everything in the real sky rises in the east and sets in the west, indifferent to any traveler beneath it. Which is exactly why a growing number of scholars now argue the star was never meant to be read as a normal astronomical object at all. In ancient Jewish and Greco-Roman writing, a star guiding a birth or death was a familiar literary sign of divine favor, a symbol readers were expected to understand as meaning, not merely as weather. On this reading, Matthew may be describing something the Magi genuinely saw in the real sky, a true conjunction, comet, or nova, and then narrating its meaning using the language his own readers would recognize as a sign of kingship. That would explain both puzzles at once. Something real enough for a Babylonian priest to notice, and a message clear enough for an ancient reader to instantly understand. It would not make the account less true. It would make it exactly as ancient writers meant such accounts to work, real events, narrated in the language of meaning. None of this has stopped astronomers from trying to nail the mechanism down precisely, because if any theory is right, the date it points to matters enormously. Modern planetarium software can now run the sky backward, second by second, to any night in ancient history. For a people who read the sky as a language, a sign that dramatic would have been impossible to miss. Run back to 7 BC, and the software confirms it exactly. Jupiter and Saturn really did meet 3 times that year, low in the constellation the ancients called the Fishes, a sign some later Jewish sources linked directly to Israel. Run it back to 2 BC instead, and a different pattern appears, Jupiter meeting the bright star Regulus not once but 3 times, then a spectacular close pairing with Venus. For a matter of minutes, observers in the ancient Near East would have seen what looked like a single, impossibly bright new star, low in the west, exactly where a traveler heading toward Judea would be looking. That 2 BC date is debated too, resting on how exactly ancient historians dated Herod's death, a question scholars still have not fully settled. So 3 separate skies, 3 separate years, 3 respected theories, and to this day, not one of them commands full agreement. A gap of centuries and disciplines, all converging, oddly, on roughly the same handful of years. Which is precisely what makes this such an unusual case in the history of science. Most ancient mysteries fade because no one thought to record them. This one persists for the opposite reason. Too many careful records exist, Babylonian, Chinese, Korean, Roman, and none of them line up into one single, undisputed answer. Every generation of astronomers has taken a turn at it. Kepler in the 1600s. Modern astrophysicists with satellite-grade star charts in our own century. And every single one has run into the same wall. The sky can be reconstructed with total precision. The meaning ancient people attach to it cannot. There is a human side to this puzzle too, easy to lose beneath the astronomy. The Magi themselves cross an entire desert, on the strength of a pattern in the sky alone. Whatever moved across that sky, real people navigated by it, for weeks, trusting a lifetime of trained sky reading over the safety of staying home. And when the account says they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy at seeing the star again, that emotion is oddly specific for something so often dismissed as pure legend. People do not typically weep with joy at literary symbolism. They weep with joy at something they can actually, finally, see, which is a more honest answer than most retellings of this story are willing to admit. So whatever this was, planet, comet, nova, or sign, it was, to the people who followed it, unmistakably real, a choice none of them, in nearly 2,000 years since, has ever been able to fully close. Modern skeptics have proposed still other explanations. A slow-moving meteor, an optical trick of low-altitude planets refracted through desert haze. None fully account for every detail Matthew records. And that, more than any single theory, is the honest state of the science today. Strong candidates. No unanimous verdict. Even scholars standing far closer to the actual event, in time and geography both, argued about exactly this. Which leaves us exactly where the earliest Christian scholars stood, choosing between several genuinely plausible skies, and never quite being able to prove just one of them. Some of the earliest church writers, within a few centuries of the event itself, already disagreed about whether the star was a natural phenomenon or something else entirely. Which tells us something important: even people far closer to the event than we are could not settle the question with certainty either. If the earliest readers could not agree, later certainty about the star as a fixed fact should be held loosely too. The star did not stay confined to a single gospel page. Within a few centuries it was carved into sarcophagi, painted onto catacomb ceilings, and eventually fixed, permanently, as a many-pointed light over a manger in nearly every Christian nativity image made since. That afterlife matters, because it means the question modern astronomers argue about is not a fringe curiosity. It is a detail that shaped 2,000 years of art, liturgy, and imagination, all resting on a handful of disputed verses and a still unresolved sky. That has not stopped the search. If anything, better instruments have only sharpened the debate, not ended it. Centuries of believers have stood beneath exactly that image without ever knowing which real sky, if any, first inspired it. Every few years, a new paper argues for a slightly different date, a slightly different planetary pairing, a slightly different reading of an old Chinese scroll. And every few years, other astronomers push back, pointing at exactly the detail, the star's motion, its stillness, its precise timing, that their theory still cannot fully explain. So after 2,000 years of records, calculations, and careful argument, what is actually left standing, once every weak theory has been quietly set aside by the people who study this for a living? 3 real, datable, astronomically confirmed events: the 7 BC triple conjunction, the 5 BC guest star, the 2 BC planetary pairing near Regulus, each independently strong enough to explain part of the account. And one detail, the star's motion and its stopping directly over one house, that none of them, on its own, has ever fully explained. That is the real answer this mystery has produced, not a single triumphant proof, but 3 genuinely serious candidates, and one honest, unresolved gap between the sky and the story. Which may be exactly why this account has outlasted every attempt to fully explain it away. Not one theory has ever won outright, and not one has ever been fully ruled out either. A real sky, real enough for Babylonian priests and Chinese court astronomers to write down independently, wrapped around a claim no purely natural theory has ever completely closed. 2,000 years later, with satellites, spectrometers, and software that can rebuild any ancient sky exactly as it once looked, that gap has not closed. If anything, it has only become better documented. The magi followed something across that desert. The sky itself remembers 3 real candidates for what it was. The instruments have changed completely. The core disagreement about what the ancient text actually describes has not moved an inch. And the last few feet of the story, the part where the light stops, and simply, impossibly, hold still, remain exactly where they have always been. Unexplained. Still there. Still watched. Still, after 2,000 years, unexplained. Every generation gets to look up at the same sky and ask the same question the magi once did.